Hi, welcome to our Teach Me video. Our essential question is, how can using repeated addition and groups help you solve multiplication problems? Today, we're going to learn how to solve multiplication equations using repeated addition and repeated groups. Here's some multiplication vocabulary that we should be aware of. When you see the problem 3 times 4 or any multiplication expression or sentence, the two numbers here are known as factors. They are the numbers being multiplied together. At the end of our equation, we have another number which is known as the product. The product is the answer to a multiplication sentence. Here now are some examples of the two strategies that we're going to use. Repeated groups must have the same number in each group. Repeated groups is a way of using a picture to model the multiplication sentence. The additional strategy is repeated addition. Repeated addition is simply adding one of the factors over and over again. We demonstrate to students that multiplication is simply a faster way of adding. Now, let's practice. Here we have the equation 2 times 8. Now, using repeated groups, I teach students that the first number is the number that will tell you the number of groups you should have. So we use the first factor to determine how many large groups we should have. We use the second factor to determine how many pieces should be inside each group. So we have 2 large groups that will have 8 pieces inside. When children are drawing a repeated group model, I typically have them make the circles large enough that they can put in the appropriate amount of tallies on the inside, and I try to have them create their repeated groups clean and neat so that they don't mix themselves up. After they have created the 2 repeated groups, they will simply count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I normally instruct the students to write the number that they finish counting under the repeated group so that if they ever lose count, they'll know where they stopped. 8. We'll start in our second one, so we'll start 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So we see by repeated groups, 8 times 2, or 2 times 8, equals 16. We'll now solve the same problem using repeated addition. I tell students that the main difference between repeated addition and repeated groups is that groups typically use a picture while repeated addition simply uses numbers. Again, we have 2 times 8. We'll use the first factor to determine how many times we're going to add the second factor. Our second factor, which is 8, we're going to add that 2 times. 8 plus 8, we know, equals 16. And we're done. 2 times 8 equals 16. Let's try another example. We now have 2 times 9. Again, we use our first factor to determine how many groups we'll be repeating. We use the second factor to determine how many should be inside each group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, now when we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, remember to write that number under your repeated group so you don't forget. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 18. Okay, now let's try repeated addition. 2 times 9 equals, our first factor will tell us how many times we're going to add the second factor. 9 plus 9, which is 18. Let's try another example. This time we have 2 times 6. Again, our first factor gives us the amount of groups. Second factor tells us how many to put inside each group. We simply count 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And we're done with our repeated groups. We do the same thing with repeated addition. Our first factor tells us how many times we're going to add our second factor. We're going to add 6 2 times, which equals 12. Let's try another example. This time we have repeated groups listed. So I'm going to count the number of repeated groups I have. 1, 2, 3. I have 3 repeated groups. Now, each time that I have a group, I'm noticing that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every time that I have a repeated group, I have 5 small squares. So our equation is 3 times 5. Now, when we begin to count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We notice that 3 times 5 equals 15. Again, with repeated addition, we write 3 times 5. Our first factor tells us how many times we're going to add our second factor. Sometimes if it's more difficult for students to see it like that, we can break it apart by combining factors one at a time. So 5 plus 5 is 10 plus 5. Then we combine 10 plus 5, which equals 15. Now, let's try finding the product of an answer or question in a word problem. Feel free, parents, at this time, if you want to practice by putting the video on pause. I'm going to now use a split screen so that I can kind of keep the word problem up so that you can see. So Mr. Howard has 2 jars full of marbles. Each jar has 8 marbles inside. How many total marbles does Mr. Howard have in all? So here we want the students to focus on that there are 2 jars full of marbles. Each jar, or every jar, has 8 marbles in it. How many total marbles does Mr. Howard have in all? So we're looking for the total amount of marbles that Mr. Howard has. So simply here, I'm going to show you how to solve this problem using both strategies. So if there's 2 jars, I'm simply going to draw my 2 jars, and I'm going to put my 8 marbles inside. Three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, emphasize to students that repeated groups mean each group has to have the same amount. So as we begin to count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Both groups have 8 inside. So simply we have 8. Remember, after you finish counting one group, remember to write it down so that you don't forget. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So using repeated groups, we find here that if Mr. Howard has 2 jars and they both have 8 inside, we're simply doing 2 times 8, which equals 16. We'll now solve that same equation using repeated groups. We have 2 jars, each with 8 inside. Our first factor tells us how many times we're going to add our second factor. 8 plus 8, which equals 16. So our answer is C. Let's continue on with another example. Here, parents, again, if you would like for your child to try this problem first, pause the video. Now, let's solve. Again, I'm going to split the screen so that you can see the word problem as I'm working through it. Miss Bradley has 6 pair of shoes. How many total shoes does Miss Bradley have altogether? So here, emphasize, Bradley has 6 pairs of shoes. She has 6 pair of shoes. Here, students will have to infer and really think about what is a pair. Pair means 2. So there's 2 pairs of shoes, and she has 6 pairs of them. So our equation is 2 times 6. Again, we're going to solve it using repeated addition and repeated groups. So I have 2 groups, this time, of 6. Here we can see 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Or 2 times 6 equals 6 plus 6, because our first factor tells us how many times we're going to add our second factor, which is 12. So again, our answer is C. Let's try one more example. Again, parents, if you would like for your child to practice, simply pause the video at this time. Now, let's go over the correct strategy. A silkworm crawls 2 millimeters each day for 7 days. What is the total distance that the silkworm traveled? Again, we want the students to notice that each day means every day for 7 days, this inchworm crawled 2 millimeters. So we're going to solve using both strategies. Okay, so for 7 days, so we have 2 millimeters each day. So again, we have, for our number sentence will be 2 times 7. Put in our boxes. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Again, make sure each group has the same number in the repeated group. Here we have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So 2 times 7 is 14. In repeated groups, 2 times 7, the first factor tells you how many times you're going to add the second factor. 7 plus 7, which equals 14. So here, the answer is D. Thank you. This concludes our Teach Me video.